BBC Essex.
Good morning. It is 8:05. It is BBC Essex, and as I mentioned, it was one of the biggest medical scandals in British history. Up to 30,000 NHS patients developed hepatitis C or AIDS after being infected by contaminated blood back in the 1970s and the 1980s. Many died. The remainder are living with very poor health. Well, now more compensation is on the way for families in England, but campaigners are saying thousands of people still won't get any at all. If this is something that your family's been affected by, do get in touch and tell us what you've heard and how you've coped. 0800 111 40 41. Tony Farrugia lost his dad and two uncles and a great uncle. Also has a cousin who is alive with stage 2 hepatitis C and joins me now. Tony, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning.
Morning. So just put it into perspective of how this has affected your family, if you can.
Well, our family suffer from a form of haemophilia. It's a mild form of haemophilia, and of course it's hereditary. So it was across an entire generation of my nan's children. Basically, they were 3 of the boys were haemophiliacs. They were all brothers. They were all infected through their treatment of factor VIII through the health service into the late 70s and 80s with hepatitis viruses and HIV. My father, he passed away quite quickly in 1986. He was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Spent his last 6 months basically on a locked ward in London. Subsequently, we lost another uncle to HIV a bit later on. And then my third uncle, he died around about 2012. So it's been affecting the family for the best part of 34 years. And we've still got family members that are infected. So yeah, it's been horrific. The recent government announcement, firstly, could I just say it's not compensation. Compensation has never been paid. These are ex gratia payments made by the government for support.
Right.
So yeah, the recent announcement is just awful, really. We've got 3 family members that have died, all within that circle, all brothers. We've got 3 widows, and under the current announcement, they still won't get anything. The 2 of the widows will now be included. They never have before. This will be the first time that they've received support. But the 3rd widow has passed away, so that excludes that group within this family, and they're now having to see other family members receiving support for the same thing that their father died of. But because the widow is now passed away, they're excluded. And so for us, the announcement is a joke, really. So many families are excluded. Parents who lost children as well, they've been excluded. So this doesn't go anywhere near where it should.
How can that be changed to help? What needs to be changed here?
Well, firstly, it needs to be all-inclusive. It needs to include everyone that's been infected and affected, and we're affected. And they always announce that these schemes are to help the infected and the affected, and we're affected, and we get nothing at all. And that's been the case from day one. When these schemes were set up in the late 80s into the 90s, my father had already died. We were children. We were put in care homes because he was the main carer. And there's never been any recognition or support at all, and certainly not compensation. They have announced that they will look at a framework, but again, if you read the statement, it's in the wording. They'll look. That isn't action. That's just they're going to look.
Well, Tony, as I listen to you talking, and then maybe a few other people across the county listening to this thinking the same, why is this taking so long, and why has this taken so long? It happened a long, long time ago. Why are we still at a position where these sorts of conversations are happening? And as you say, the government and other bodies are looking at things. Why has it been so slow in response to this, do you think?
Well, I think firstly, obviously, a massive cover-up. I mean, it was certainly covered in the documentary that I and a few others took part in, called In Cold Blood. And I think the evidence is there and the inquiry's uncovering it. And I think they're just dragging their heels now, that they will wait as long as they can for as many to die. You know, people are dying at one every 4 days, and the government aren't doing anything. They're just putting things into place that are, well, we'll look at this, we'll look at that. And in the meantime, people continue to die. You know, by the time this does come to where the government have to admit liability, because they are liable for this, and that's being shown, you know, by the time it comes around, it could be another 160 people that have died. We've already lost 270 since the inquiry was announced. So families are continuing to suffer, well, more or less what we did. You know, people are losing their homes. Once the person who is on the scheme passes away, you know, prior to this announcement, the money stops. You know, this is only a first where this ex gratia payment is not compensation, has been paid to the widow. And then it's not straightforward, as I say. We've got 3 widows. One's died, so that family are excluded. And I think there's many others out there. There's children that lost both parents, so they haven't got a mother. They're excluded as well. It's absolutely disgraceful.
Well, the government has acknowledged. Well, the government have acknowledged. I've got a statement. I'll bring that in full. But they've acknowledged this tragedy shouldn't have happened, and the inquiry has been set up to establish the truth and give families the answers they deserve. And I'll bring that whole statement in just a moment. But I also want to talk to you a bit about. You've mentioned some of the ways in which this has impacted your life, but how that felt really growing up, going through all of that and losing family members one by one. How does that affect you?
Well, there was a lot of isolation, obviously, with the HIV stigma. We were isolated. I couldn't really tell people what my dad had died of, so that was quite difficult. He was having to lie. Then there was the stigma of HIV, the jokes, you know. It was right smack bang when all this started. And my dad died in 1986. We found out in 1985. And then it was coming through then, the jokes, and then having to watch. HIV is a terrible, terrible death. It wasn't just HIV for my dad. You know, a lot of these haemophiliacs, they were infected with a multitude of viruses. It wasn't just HIV. There was hepatitis B, hepatitis C, hepatitis. It's a whole alphabet of hepatitises and various viruses, parvovirus, herpes, all sorts, all through these blood products that they knew right from the inception of them being used, that there were risks. They knew that, and it's all coming out in the inquiry. That's the thing, and I think it's now time for the government to act strongly, and what they've just done isn't strongly. You know, it's left thousands of families still without any support, and there's never been compensation. I mean, obviously that's our ultimate goal, that they should pay compensation to the victims and their families. And, you know, they have in other countries. Ireland have got a compensation scheme, and there's no reason why the government can't implement this now instead of making people wait, because more will die. And it just tells me that they're just waiting for people to die.
Tony, thank you for joining us on the show this morning, Tony Farrugia. Let's bring in Jason Evans, founder of the campaign group Factor 8, who also lost his father in 1993 after being infected with hepatitis C and HIV from contaminated blood. Jason, good morning to you.
Good morning, Sonia.
Morning. You can hear the heartbreak, the frustration, the sadness in Tony's voice, and I guess some of his experience chimes with you as well, Jason.
It does, and I can. I mean, me and Tony we first met each other back in 2016 at a protest outside Parliament, and we've been campaigning together on this ever since, really. And yeah, I mean, since this government announcement last week, our inboxes have been flooded with people who are wondering whether or not they are eligible for support. And more often than not, at the moment, we're having to tell people the answer is no, because as Tony was saying, for parents who have lost children, in families where there is no widow or partner, either because the relationship broke down, and so there was no partner after the infected person died, or in circumstances where the widow or partner has since died. So arguably, the great irony of this is it's some of the very worst impacted families that are excluded, which is bizarre. But I suppose that's Whitehall thinking for you. And I suppose part of our job now is to, try and get that addressed, because it is totally wrong now that there is a situation where some bereaved families do now receive support and some don't. And it is an important distinction, as Tony said, that this support, it's not compensation, because it doesn't address past or future loss at all. It's benefits, let's be honest. It's welfare benefits is what it is, which families should receive.
Yeah.
And the fact that there's this complete arbitrary ring fence, which is probably there just to minimise the cost, is terrible. And ultimately, the outcome of this is the public and the media have been grossly misled by this government announcement. If you look at the written statement that came out last week, it talks about affected people, it talks about families, and it's just not true. It's an out and out lie, and it's disgraceful what they've done, really. And I've spoken to so many distressed families over the last week. It's unbelievable.
Well, they say that they've always been clear those affected by the tragedy should be supported by a fair and transparent support scheme focusing on welfare and independence. So there is an acknowledgement that they're trying to recognise and help those affected, but you think it's not going anywhere near far enough?
No, and I think the time they've had to work on this, myself, Tony, and about 16, 17 others, we went to the Cabinet Office in January last year, and we met face-to-face with the then Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden and the Health Minister Nadine Dorries. And it was all made very clear what was needed. And, these people looked us in the face, including a high-powered civil servant called Sue Gray as well. They looked us in the face and they made everyone believe, in that room, that they cared and that they were going to do the right thing. And it didn't happen. And it's been 14 months since then. And at this point, I think, we're looking at the government now just as bad as Bayer and Baxter and Revlon that manufactured the infected Factor 8 products and saying, you'll know better. You know better than these companies that manufactured these.
Well, I'm sure they do care, and hopefully you will get some of the answers and the help that you need, Jason. And thank you for coming on the show as well and talking to us today. Jason Evans is founder of the campaign group Factor 8, also lost his father. If you've been affected by this, 0800 111 40 41, 8:18 is the time. 8:20. We've been talking about the blood scandal from many, many years ago, and the families still seeking answers and financial support in the wake of those tragedies. I've got a full statement to bring you from the Department for Health and Social Care. I mentioned a bit of it earlier, but let me read it out to you in full. They say the infected blood tragedy should never have happened. The ongoing public inquiry was set up to establish the truth and give individuals and families the answers they rightly deserve. We've always been clear that those who've been affected by this tragedy should be supported by a fair and transparent support scheme focused on their welfare and providing long-term independence. The government has listened to the call for parity of support across the UK and last week announced a package for the whole of the UK which will bring greater uniformity to the 4 national support schemes. And that's one of the reasons we were talking about it today, the fact that they have brought in this new package for the whole of the UK for financial support. But as both our guests mentioned, not compensation financial support. And they're worried that it still doesn't get to as many people as they would like to see supported and helped in this way. If you want to contribute to this, perhaps you have experience of it in your own family, 0800 111 40 41. Lauren Palmer lost her parents 8 days days apart when she was 9 years old in 1993. Her dad was given contaminated blood and the infection was then passed to her mum. And Lauren joins me now. Morning, Lauren.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm not too bad. So tell us, if you don't mind, how this has affected your life. It sounds particularly tragic what's happened to you.
Well, yeah. Well, my dad was also a haemophiliac. So it was in the family. He was receiving contaminated blood products as his treatment. He was co-infected with HIV and hepatitis C, and unfortunately passed these infections on to my mother as well. And subsequently, they both passed when I was 9 years old, within 8 days of one another. Obviously, it all happened very, very quickly, and as you can imagine, it completely transformed and blew our family apart.
What happened to you afterwards then? What in the years after? What happened?
So I was our family. I had two half brothers. They went to live with their biological father. I moved away from the area and lived with another family member. And yeah, I grew up without both my parents, which was extremely difficult, and a life trauma which has taken me many years to try and get over. And the hardest part was being separated from my brothers and having to grow up also without them, as well as losing my parents.
And when you hear about the inquiry that's obviously going on and the talk around the funding, the support, the financial support, the sort of greater parity of that, how does it feel? Because you're still living through that yourself. Does it give you some comfort that there is progression and that there may be some answers? Or do you feel quite frustrated and angry, like Tony said, that it doesn't go far enough, it's not happening quickly enough?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not fair and transparent at all. The announcement is it's excluding so many people. And the worst thing is, if my mum was still alive, she would have been receiving the support, and our family would have had the support. But I've lost both parents, and that means nothing. We've had to grow up and survive without anything. And I can't get my head around that and see the reasoning behind that. And the fact that there's other children out there that are in the same position, and there's parents who have lost children who are excluded. And it needs to include everyone that's been affected by this.
Yeah, and do you think that will be looked at, or are you not hopeful?
They always say that they're looking into things. It's just delaying tactics, as Tony said. And I'm not hopeful that it will ever really amount to anything.
What would it mean to you, the financial support aside? That's sort of one thing, but you've also got this review going on separately. What would it mean to you to finally hear an outcome of that inquiry? I don't know if there's any sort of time frame on when that's likely to end or report back. You would know much more than me, Lauren. Do they have any ideas when it might finish?
The inquiry is very extensive, and it's going to take many years. And like Tony and Jason have both highlighted, people are dying with every 4 days. People are dying now, and will have many more deaths by the end of the inquiry, which is why it's so important that action needs to be taken right away. It can't keep going on and on. I mean, the inquiry is there to uncover the truth, but that's not helping people that are suffering right now.
And what would it mean for you to finally get some answers when that day comes?
It would mean, I think it would be a lot of closure for everyone. Ultimately, we just want the government to just accept liability, because it's very apparent now with the evidence that they are to blame.
Thank you very much for talking to us this morning, Lauren. Of course, that inquiry is still continuing. Might be quite a way off before we get an outcome, but that inquiry ongoing. Just a tragic story, hearing from so many families affected by it. Perhaps that's also affected your family from years ago.